When the cruise liner Seraphine left port, it carried 2,400 passengers, 900 crew members, and one secret no one was supposed to uncover. Everything about the voyage felt curated. The staff smiled too perfectly. The music in the atrium looped the same cheerful melody every 2 hours. The food tasted fine but lacked soul. Most guests didn't notice. They were too caught up in excursions, bottomless drinks, and the illusion of luxury. But a few passengers sensed something was off by day 3. It started with the sunrise. On day 1 and 2, the morning sun rose over the same stretch of water. But by the 3rd day, it didn't rise at all. The sky just gradually lit up, dimly, gray-blue, without any sun in sight. Some blamed it on clouds. Others whispered about northern waters. But they were cruising near the Caribbean. There should have been heat, brightness, even humidity. Instead, the air was dry, unnaturally still, like the ship was moving through a vacuum. By day 5, no land had been seen for over 100 hours. The itinerary listed daily stops: St. Thomas, San Juan, Nassau, but none happened. The intercom played recordings of the captain's voice, announcing weather delays, shifting plans, and a unique opportunity to stay at sea longer. Most passengers accepted it. Free drinks were offered. Buffets extended hours. Entertainment grew louder, more aggressive. Comedians, hypnotists, magicians. Distraction had become protocol. But some passengers tried to ask questions. A couple from Ohio was last seen pressing the front desk about their missed excursion. Their room was emptied the next morning. A man who filmed the same hallway door opening and closing by itself for hours vanished. His video was erased from his phone overnight. The device itself was found submerged in one of the spa's hot tubs. Still warm, still logged into his account, with nothing in its gallery. By day 8, no one could access the ship's Wi-Fi. Cabin phones gave only dial tones. The navigation channel on stateroom TVs showed no coordinates, just static. Some people started to panic. Others laughed it off, drank more, and insisted it was part of an elaborate themed experience. It wasn't. One woman, a quiet, middle-aged passenger traveling alone, noticed the ocean around the Seraphine never changed color.
No waves.
No movement, just endless black, with a greenish sheen under the moonlight. She started timing things. Meals were served at exactly 8 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, regardless of weather, ship movement, or announcements. Shows always began at 7:45. Every elevator played the same elevator music, a distorted lullaby that reversed itself halfway through. She told a few others, and soon a small group began meeting in the lower deck gym at night, behind the unused yoga room. There, they compared notes. Some realized they hadn't seen any seagulls or any birds at all since day 1. Others pointed out that the crew's uniforms had changed subtly over time. Their name tags were now blank. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes anymore. On the 10th day, the pool water turned black. Not murky, not dirty, black, reflective like ink. A teenager dared his friend to jump in. He did. He never came back up. The pool was drained within an hour. When asked, a cruise director claimed maintenance. When pressed, he blinked once and said, "You must be mistaken. We've never had a pool on board." By now, panic was spreading, but it was quiet, polite panic. People stopped making eye contact. The nightly music in the ballroom got louder, drowning out the whispers. The casino never closed. Slot machines rang even when no one played them. On the 12th day, the ship tried to dock. That's what everyone thought at first. The fog lifted just enough to reveal a coast, dark cliffs, distant lights, a hint of civilization. People gathered on the deck in relief. Laughter, hugs, Cell phones raised in the air, desperately searching for a signal. The ship stopped. Not at a dock, not near a port. Just stopped. The lights on the shore flickered. Shapes moved. But the shapes weren't welcoming. They were tall, thin, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing in perfect silence along the ridge, watching. Then the fog returned, thicker than before. The land vanished. The ship turned without engine noise and drifted away from the coast like it had been repelled. No one talked about it afterward. But some passengers started screaming at night. Others refused to leave their rooms. A mother reported her daughter missing. The crew returned the girl, but her eyes were the wrong color. She spoke perfect Spanish, but the mother only spoke English. She claimed she didn't have a daughter. By the 15th day, time felt loose. A man shaved and found his beard fully regrown hours later. A child said she had 2 birthdays on the same day. One passenger jumped overboard at sunset. The water made no splash. The waves didn't ripple. It was like he fell into glass. Eventually, the ship stopped making announcements. The crew no longer pretended. People aged without explanation. Teeth fell out. A woman found her nails growing an inch a day. A man said he'd been on the ship before, but couldn't remember when. He scratched open a wall panel and found a photo of himself inside. Framed, grinning, next to a placard labeled Seraphine's first guest. Today, the ship still sails. No port ever receives it. No rescue mission finds it. Cruise lines deny its existence. But sometimes a postcard arrives, stamped with no country, no date, just a single sentence in elegant handwriting. The cruise ship never docked again. Mark and Lena arrived at the inn just after sunset. The building stood at the edge of a dense forest in rural Vermont, with fading colonial architecture and creaky wooden steps that groaned beneath their feet. The innkeeper, an elderly woman with sunken eyes and a voice like dry leaves, handed them a rusted key. "You're the only ones tonight," she whispered, as if saying more would wake something. Room 3, at the far end of the hallway. The floorboards whined under every step, and the hallway lights flickered as if they struggled to stay awake. Their room was plain: 2 twin beds, a faded landscape painting, and an antique mirror mounted across from the window. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something else. Old, stale, like a room sealed shut for decades. That night, around 2:17 a.m., Lena sat up in bed. She couldn't explain what had woken her. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe the silence, too perfect to be natural. She turned to Mark, asleep and breathing steadily, then glanced toward the mirror. Something moved, not in the room, in the reflection. She stared harder. There, at the edge of the mirror, something tall and pale stood in the hallway. Not walking, just standing, watching. She held her breath. The door was closed. When she blinked, it was gone. The next morning, Mark mentioned hearing whispers during the night. He brushed it off as a dream. Lena didn't argue, but she noticed something odd. The door was cracked open, just slightly. At breakfast, the dining room was empty. No other guests, no staff, just a cold pot of coffee sitting on a side table, a single slice of bread on a plate, and a whisper of perfume in the air, like someone had just walked past. Mark called out a few times. No answer. He checked the front desk. The innkeeper was gone. The ledger sat open, only their names filled in. Every other line blank. But the desk phone had a sticky note taped to it. 5 words, scribbled hastily in red ink. Never open the mirror frame. They hadn't touched it. Not yet. That night they both stayed up. The mirror bothered them. More than the locked door downstairs. More than the missing innkeeper. It wasn't just reflecting the room. It reflected something behind it. Something moving. They argued. Mark wanted to check it. Lena begged him not to. The note, it felt like a warning. But curiosity won. It always does. Mark approached the mirror. He felt along the edge of the frame and found a latch. Subtle. Hidden. Like it was meant to stay that way. Click. The glass shifted slightly forward, revealing a dark hollow behind it. A narrow compartment between the wall and the room. And inside, photographs. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Faded Polaroids. Every one of a guest sleeping in that same bed. Some modern, some decades old. And all of them had one thing in common. In the corner of every photo stood the same figure. Tall. Pale. Featureless. Watching. Lena pulled out one photo. Her hands shook. It was her. Last night. Eyes closed. Blanket pulled to her chin. And the figure inches from the bedpost. Mark found one of himself. There were others. Guests they'd never seen. A couple from 1993. A child from 1971. A man who looked eerily like Mark's father, but younger. They shut the mirror. Tried to sleep. At 3:11 a.m., the doorknob turned. Slowly. Silently. But the door didn't open. Lena stared at it, frozen. Mark whispered her name. The mirror across the room began to fog, as if someone were breathing from the inside. A handprint pressed against the glass, on the inner surface behind the mirror. Then another, and another. They didn't sleep. They just waited for morning. But it never came. The sky stayed dark. The clock blinked 4:03, then 4:03 again. And again. The sun never rose. They opened the door. The hallway outside wasn't empty anymore. The portraits on the walls, faces blurred. Some moved as they passed. A whisper followed them wherever they walked. Back at the front desk, the ledger had changed. Their names were still there. But now, below them was a new entry. Room 4. Occupied. They hadn't seen room 4 before. It wasn't on the map. But the hallway was longer now. Mark turned to Lena. His voice broke. Did you hear that? A knock. Slow. From inside the mirror. One knock. Then two. The glass began to crack. Not shatter, crack. Veins of black running through it, like something trying to bleed through. Lena reached for the door, but the handle burned her palm. She screamed. Mark backed away from the mirror as a shadow began to pull itself through the broken glass. Then everything went silent, and they woke up, back in their beds. Morning sun shining through the window, birds chirping outside. Had it all been a dream? Mark checked the mirror.
No cracks. No fingerprints.
Just their reflection. They packed in silence and went downstairs. The innkeeper was there this time, standing perfectly still behind the counter, smiling. I hope you enjoyed your stay, she said. Her voice was smooth now, too smooth. Mark handed her the key. His hand trembled. We did. Thank you. As they turned to leave, she called after them. Oh, one last thing, she said. We've added your photo to the wall. Mark turned. There, behind the front desk, was a framed Polaroid. Fresh. Lena sleeping. Mark watching her. And in the background, the mirror, cracked. We had been on the trail for 3 hours when we saw him. He came around the bend, walking with a calm, even pace, his eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. A navy windbreaker zipped up to his chin, a khaki backpack with patches frayed at the corners. He nodded at us as we passed, said nothing.
No smile.
Just that nod. And then he was gone, swallowed back into the forest like he'd never been there. I remember the way his boots didn't make a sound, how the birds stopped chirping for a moment when he passed us. We were hiking in northern Colorado, a trail that's popular enough during the summer, but we were there in early May. Off-season. Too early for tourists, too late for snow. The silence of the woods felt more complete than it should have. Every twig we stepped on sounded like thunder. We were four, me, my girlfriend Clara, and our two friends Nate and Marissa. We joked, took pictures, pointed out strange trees. But the man stuck in my head. He hadn't looked lost or confused. He looked like someone who had been walking for a long time and had no intention of stopping. That night, back at the cabin, we put on the TV while eating dinner. Clara was flipping channels when the screen landed on a local news report. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. That face. The mirrored sunglasses were gone. But it was him. Same windbreaker. Same expressionless stare. Been missing since March 4th, the anchor was saying. 28-year-old Thomas Griggs vanished while hiking the Elk Crest Trail. His last known location was logged at a ranger checkpoint near Beartooth Pass. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace has been found. The photo beside the anchor was clearer than what I'd seen on the trail, but it was him. I knew it. He was clean-shaven in the photo, but that's not what got me. It was the jawline, the way his ears sat slightly lower than they should have. You don't forget a face like that. Marissa noticed it too. Her fork dropped. We passed him today, she said. That guy. He walked right by us. Nate laughed. No way. You're just freaked out. But Clara stared at the screen for a long time, lips tight. We tried to brush it off. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we were projecting. But all of us, except Nate, couldn't shake the feeling. The resemblance wasn't just close. It was perfect. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound outside the cabin. Footsteps. Not heavy. Slow. Measured. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window. Fog rolled off the trees like smoke. And then I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the woods. The same windbreaker. The same posture. Head slightly tilted like he was waiting. I didn't wake the others. Just watched as he turned and walked back into the forest. The next morning I didn't mention it. Thought I'd imagined it, maybe, until Marissa said she heard footsteps too. No one else confessed to seeing anything. We cut our trip short and left the next day. But the strange part came when we stopped for gas in a small town 2 hours down the mountain. I grabbed a drink inside, and at the counter was a rack of missing person flyers. The same face stared back at me, but the date was wrong. Not March 4th. The flyer said he'd gone missing in 2015. 10 years ago. I stared at it. Same name, same age. But how could that be? Back at the car, I showed Clara. She froze. There must be a mistake, she whispered. The report said March this year. We Googled it. Every source said the same thing, March 4th, 2025. But the flyer in my hand clearly said 2015. Same man, same details. It was like time had looped, or the forest hadn't let him go. That night, back in the city, Clara and I tried to forget. But over the following weeks, strange things kept happening. We'd get calls with silence on the other end. Random knocks on the door with no one there. Sometimes, in crowded places, I'd catch a glimpse of a windbreaker disappearing into a crowd. Once I found a footprint outside my window. It was fresh, muddy, deep, but we lived on the second floor. A month passed. Then, another news story. A different missing hiker. This time, a woman. Same trail. Same area. And in the footage shown, grainy and shaky, someone is walking behind her. In the trees. Half visible. He's wearing a navy windbreaker. I looked closer. So did Clara. He's not older. Not aged. Just exactly the same. That was 3 months ago. Now, sometimes when I look into mirrors, I see a forest behind me. dense, silent. Something standing in the distance, always just out of focus. We passed a hiker on the trail, but maybe he wasn't passing us. Maybe he was choosing, and maybe he chose us. They booked the room last minute, room 217, top floor, corner suite. The hotel was old, built in the early 1900s, with brass keys instead of cards and wallpaper that peeled like dry skin. They didn't care. It was cheap, and they needed a place to crash before their early morning flight. The woman at the front desk warned them the mirror in the room hadn't been replaced since the hotel opened. She smiled after saying it, but it didn't feel like a joke. The room was ordinary. A queen bed, faded curtains, and the mirror. A full-length antique hanging opposite the bed. The glass was slightly warped, tinted with age, and framed in blackened wood with delicate carvings that looked like they were once flowers but now resembled something twisted and brittle. The first thing they noticed was that the mirror didn't reflect the lighting quite right. The ceiling light flickered in the mirror when it was perfectly steady in the room. They laughed it off, blaming the old wiring or the age of the glass. But the mirror didn't just flicker, it shifted. When one of them walked past, the reflection hesitated for a second, like it needed a moment to catch up. Sometimes the reflection's eyes were still staring ahead, even when the real person had turned away. They started keeping track, testing it. Standing still, moving suddenly, looking for a lag. It was always subtle, just enough to make them question their own senses. But then, it wasn't just the delay. They noticed the reflection started showing things that weren't in the room. Small changes. A crack in the wall that didn't exist. The comforter slightly pulled back when the bed was still made. A shadow passing the doorway when no one was there. At 3:03 a.m., the reflection changed completely. The lights in the room were off, but in the mirror, they were on. The reflection showed the same room, same angle, but the curtains were drawn open and it was raining. In reality, the curtains were shut, and outside it was dry and silent. One of them reached out to touch the glass, and the reflection did not move. The reflected version of him just stared back. Not mirroring, just watching. They called the front desk, but the phone didn't work. The cell signal was gone. They tried leaving the room, but the door wouldn't open. Not locked, just unresponsive. Like the handle turned but wasn't connected to anything. Back at the mirror, the reflected room began to distort. The figures in the reflection, no longer just the two of them, moved differently. They began doing things the real people hadn't done. One of the reflections walked to the window and opened it. The real window didn't budge. The other sat on the edge of the bed and wept silently, even as the real person stood frozen in front of the mirror. The reflection became a performance of what might have happened, or will happen. Then the bruises began to appear. First on the reflections, dark marks on their arms and necks. Then, a few minutes later, those same marks appeared on the real bodies. No sensation, no pain, just the visual proof of something happening elsewhere. Something rewriting cause and effect. By dawn, the mirror reflected a version of the room in ruins. Wallpaper scorched, mirror frame cracked, bed stripped and soaked in something that looked like water, but might not have been. The figures in the mirror were gone, but the real room remained intact. For now. At 7:14 a.m., the door opened on its own. No sound, just a soft click, and then it drifted an inch inward. They didn't hesitate. They left everything, bags, phones, jackets, and ran down the stairs. The lobby was empty. The woman at the front desk was gone. Outside, the street was normal. Cars passed. People walked dogs. But the air felt wrong. A second too still. Colors a shade too flat. When they checked their phones again, the last photo taken showed them asleep in the bed, with the mirror behind them. But in the mirror's reflection, They were both wide awake and staring. A month later, one of them returned to the hotel. Alone. The place had changed names. Same building, different branding. Room 217 no longer existed. Renovations had divided the top floor into smaller rooms. The receptionist claimed there'd never been a mirror in that room. No antique furnishings at all. He asked to see old photos, blueprints, anything. But none of the records showed room 217 ever had a mirror. And yet, sometimes when he's home, he swears he sees flickering reflections in places they shouldn't be. In windows, in shadows on blank TV screens, in puddles, in glass he never remembers putting there. The bruises haven't returned. But the timeline isn't quite right anymore. And he wonders if the mirror let them leave, or if they're still in that room, watching themselves from the other side. We arrived in the village late in the afternoon. A quaint, mist-draped place nestled in the northern highlands, surrounded by endless fields and pine-covered hills. My partner and I had booked a small cottage on the edge of town, drawn by the promise of serenity and untouched countryside. The kind of place untouched by time, or so we thought. The first oddity came quickly. We were checking into a local grocer to pick up supplies. A weathered woman behind the counter squinted at us as we paid. "Have you seen the twins yet?" she asked, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. We smiled politely and shook our heads. "No, just got in." She didn't elaborate, just nodded slowly, her eyes lingering too long on us as we left. That phrase would become a pattern. Everywhere we went, we were asked the same question. At the bakery, "Have you seen the twins yet?" At the pub, "They're hard to miss. You'll see them soon enough." Even the man who delivered firewood to our cottage muttered it before leaving. They like visitors, especially ones from far away. It would have been easy to chalk up to some local folklore or superstition, something small towns cling to. But there was no smirk, no wink of irony. The question was always asked with the same eerie sincerity, like we were expected to report back when it happened. That night, we joked about it over wine. Probably some village ghost story, we said. Maybe some tragic siblings who died in the woods. The kind of tale that gives kids nightmares and adults a reason to drink. But when I woke up to the sound of tapping on the window, it didn't feel like a joke. 3 soft taps. I froze, heart pounding. We were on the second floor. The only thing outside the window was wind and darkness. I stared for a long time. Nothing. No figures, no shapes, no movement. I must have fallen asleep eventually, convincing myself it was a tree branch or the house settling. But in the morning, I saw it. Faint handprints on the glass. Small. Child-sized. I didn't tell my partner. The next day, a man at the local market stared at us with open concern. "If they come to your window," he said, his voice low, "don't open the curtains. Don't let them know you can see them." We left with our groceries, more confused than ever. But when I glanced back, he was still watching, lips pressed tight like he regretted saying anything at all. Back at the cottage, the mood had shifted. It felt off, the air heavier, like the house was holding its breath. We didn't speak much that night. There was a low fog rolling in outside, making everything past the porch look like a blank canvas. Around midnight, the power flickered. Once, twice. Then the lights went out completely. My partner grabbed a flashlight while I fumbled for candles. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden beams above. Then again 3 soft taps. Not the window this time. The back door. We stood still, neither of us moving. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in her hand. Another set of taps, softer this time. A child's voice whispered just outside. "We know you're in there." We didn't respond. More whispers. 2 voices now, in perfect unison. We're cold. Let us in. The air in the cottage dropped suddenly, a chill that seeped into the bones. The candles wouldn't stay lit. We huddled in the living room, praying morning would come quickly. By dawn, the tapping had stopped, but on the porch just outside the door were 2 sets of wet, muddy footprints. Barefoot, small. We tried to leave that day, packed up early, threw everything into the car. But the engine wouldn't turn over. Dead, though it had been fine the night before. A man from the village came to help. When we explained what had happened, he didn't seem surprised. You should have ignored them, he said. They get stronger when you pay attention, when you talk about them, when you see them. He looked around nervously, then added, they weren't born here. They were buried here, deep in the woods. Long time ago. Who were they? I asked. He just shook his head. No one ever says their names anymore. That night, we stayed in town at the only inn, hoping being closer to others would help. Didn't. The whispers returned, even louder, more confident. This time, they called us by name. They tapped at the windows again, but also the walls, the doors, the floorboards. They never appeared, not fully. Just glimpses. Pale faces outside the glass, small shapes darting past the edge of the firelight. We tried to cover the mirrors. Their reflections sometimes appeared even when they weren't in the room. At dawn, we found a note slid under the door. Childlike handwriting scrawled in black crayon. You've seen us now. We'll come with you. We left, forced the car to life and drove until the village disappeared in the rearview mirror. But the footprints followed us. First outside motel rooms, then in parking lots, once even in the hallway outside our apartment. The locals had asked if we'd seen the twins. Not because they were curious, because they knew what it meant if we did. It wasn't a question. It was a warning.